Hi everyone and welcome to the Empowered You podcast. I'm Javi Israel, your host, speaking to you from Sydney, Australia. After October 7, I found myself in uncomfortable situations, not sure how to respond or navigate. That's why I created the Empowered You, first an organization and now a podcast to equip you with the knowledge, skills and tools surrounding Israel and your Jewish identity. In each episode, we'll explore various topics from multiple perspectives so that you can feel informed, empowered, and proud of who you are. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Hello, Menachem Vorchheimer. Thank you so much for coming and being here today. Before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where were you born? Where were you raised?
Hi, Javi. So I'm actually born in Sydney. I'm one of four boys. I'm the second. My father was born in 1922, so pre-war Germany. And he escaped Germany on what was called the Kindertransporter program, where about 10,000 children were sent from Germany without their parents. And then he ended up in the UK. He ended up in an internment camp. And he was lucky that he got reunited with his parents after the war. But it was about 6 years that he didn't see his parents. He then actually lived in America after the UK. He became a computer programmer, came to Australia in the 1960s, and got married a little bit later in life. So when I was born, my dad was already 51 years old, and he had two more children after me. We, as a family, came to Melbourne when I was a teenager. I subsequently got married here to a Melbourne girl who's also originally from Sydney, Shoshi Finch, and we have 4 children together.
Beautiful. And we were just discussing how we used to eat meals together back in the day. Melbourne, it is a big community, kind of, but not that big. Everyone's connected one way or another.
Yeah, and indeed, I know your in-laws well as also, they're they're ex-Melbourne people, or at least your father-in-law is rather.
My mother-in-law is very
I
much.
had to correct myself, sorry.
Yeah. You're getting yourself into some dangerous territory, Sydney, Melbourne. Me and my husband also. I'm a Melbourne girl. He's a Sydney boy, but Sydney people are obsessed with Sydney and they never want to leave Sydney. But at this rate, who knows where we'll end up? We'll probably all end up, please God, in Israel. Anyways, before we get into your advocacy work that you've been doing, you yourself have a bit of a personal story when you were actually attacked on the way to Shule a couple of years back. Can you share with us your personal experience that you faced with regards to antisemitism and how that triggered you to take a stand and started your journey, which we'll get to as well.
Thanks, Javi. So back in 2006, it was Shmini Atzeres going to Simchas Torah. I was going to Shul with 2 of our children, Ri and Simi, then aged 6 and 3. And there was a bus driving down Balaclava Road. And there was a group of boys coming back from the football. And as they went past Jewish people, they were shouting out various epithets like F the Jews, go Nazis, and things of that nature. And as they came past us, they screamed out those things. And one of the boys actually motioned as if he had a machine gun shooting us down. And the light had turned red, and I was just there, where Chana is on the corner. And I went over to the driver of the bus, and I asked where they were from, and he didn't want to assist. And as the light turned green, the boys leaned out the window, they grabbed off my hat and my yarmulke, and they drove off. And the car behind them saw this, overtook the bus and cut them off just after Basil Talmud there, so just on the other side of Hotham Street. And when I went to try and get my hat back, I got grabbed, held, and then smashed across the face, ended up with a cut under my eye. The bus driver then tried to drive away, and then I sat down in front of the bus covered in blood with blood coming down my face. Fast forward, the boys weren't charged straight away, and what actually emerged was that the driver of the bus was an off-duty member of Victoria Police. And around this time, I'm not sure how much you recall, Norman Rosenbaum, Oliver Sholem, was a good family friend, and he offered to assist, and he also introduced me to Robert Richter and Remy Vanderbilt QC. Norman unfortunately had a big pursuit for justice for his brother Yankel, who was murdered in the Crown Heights riots. And what it emerged was that there was an off-duty member of Victoria Police, and we discovered that through this legal process that an off-duty member of Victoria Police still had legal responsibilities, and so therefore the state could be liable for his actions. So in short, from that process, I ended up suing the state and the police force. And then as a consequence of that, they reopened the investigation. They ended up charging the 3 boys. And then they subsequently settled that case. But it took about almost 2 years to settle the case. And I guess from that, I probably got out the notion that justice doesn't come to those unless you pursue it. It's like tzedek tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. And I
Yeah.
think that's a fair approach to life. That we can't merely be victims and say, oh, poor me. We actually sometimes have to stand up and do and pursue the right and noble end to that. And I think that's probably, if I can say, Javi, something I took from that episode, that something horrible can happen to you, but unless you actually take a stand, you don't get the result that is appropriate.
I couldn't agree with you more, Menachem. I just want to say that I'm very humbled and inspired by you because I know people who have faced anti-Semitism here in Australia, not just post-October 7th, but as it happened with you, way before October the 7th. And many of them didn't even report it to the CSG or call the police or pursue it, even in that little way that they could. And they just wrote it off and said, whatever, anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, it is what it is. But to actually take that stand and to actually take action. And I am sure that it was not easy at all for you, for your family, all the amount of time, effort, money, and everything that had to go into actually taking legal action. It's not an easy, it's not easy. So I'm really inspired that you, took those initiatives, and to sue the Victorian government is no easy feat. It really
Yeah, I
isn't.
mean, yeah, that's very kind of you, Javi. But I think, in fairness, people like Norman Rosenbaum have been pioneers in that space. He stood up for his brother. And we all learn from others. And I think without Norman's assistance and guidance, I probably may not have lasted the journey. Because, as you say, it is difficult when you're facing a large organization like the police or the state. They wear you down by a game of attrition. They try to just wear you down over time. And it's about staying that course and not mentally allowing that to get the better of you.
And when you sued the Victorian government and the police force, did you feel this sense of accomplishment? Did you feel like you had made a difference? What was the feeling when it actually was a success in the end? How did you feel about that?
Look, I mean, I didn't do it for myself, and I didn't do it for, to get an accolade. I did it because I felt very strongly that racism is an issue, and that racism has many forms. It's not just about anti-Semitism, it's about the right of all people to feel safe and secure in their identity. And what that means, Chavi, is it means for you and for your husband, and please God, when your children grow up, that they should be able and comfortable to walk down the street in the identity that they choose. So if they're Jewish, to wear a yarmulke, to wear a Magen David, to be able to say to people, my name is Chavi, not think, if I say Chavi, will they think I'm Jewish or I'm weird? And I think that's one of the most important things about all these actions, that security and identity is, something that some of us take for granted, but some of us have had to fight for. And really, what that action was about was saying that it's actually wrong to single somebody out, to attack them on the virtue of a variable. You haven't met them. They just look different. You can't have a go with them. And I think it's very, very important. And part of that resolution I achieved with Victoria Police was a commitment to put into the training manual that they would teach all future graduates within Victoria Police about the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act, about what it means to be racially vilified, religiously vilified, and that benefit wasn't just for the Jewish community, but was for communities of all faiths. And that really, society, Australian society in particular, this country is built on immigration. So we've got lots of people from lots of backgrounds. And if we can find a way that we can all live together, we can actually, achieve beautiful things. And so that outcome of that case wasn't just about Jews singular, but about, I thought, a better Australia, one in which we can all have differences, but be respectful about our differences and live together.
Beautiful. Creating a tolerant society and an inclusive society for everyone. And that's what you've been pioneering, and that takes up a huge part of your life. And yet, currently, right now, post October 7th, here in Melbourne and in Sydney, I don't know, I feel like right now, the Australia that I'm living in is a tolerant society towards people of other ethnicities, people from the LGBTQ plus communities. They're all tolerant when it comes to, immigrants and people who are coming seeking asylum. But then when it comes to Jewish people and to Israel, I feel like that there is no tolerance. I don't know if you saw that video recently in Melbourne of that hairdresser who kicked out an Israeli just by the mere fact that he was Israeli. He didn't do anything. He didn't say anything. She asked where he was from. He said Israel, and then he got kicked out. And the irony was that she was a hairdresser that was welcoming to everyone. So all of this hard work and effort that you have done, and we'll get to what you're doing right now, do you feel a bit disheartened that, and obviously it hasn't just been you, you've had the help of others, that you're putting in all this effort and time, and then you see, what happened in that hairdresser or the Adas Shule firebombing, and we have Jacinta Allen and Tony, all the big people who are politicians, and they're saying, this is very un-Australian and anti-Semitism has no place in Australia. Do you feel like you're putting in all this hard work and effort, and is it really making a difference? I know that's a loaded question, but is that something that you ever ask yourself?
So, Javi, if I could say, first and foremost, is your feelings are the same as my feelings. There's some days I wake up and think, I'm just exhausted. Is there a future for Jews in this country? And then I think to myself, unfortunately, this is part of our history over 3,000 years. At different points in our history, we've been vilified, marginalized, but we've always come through. We're one of the only peoples that have got that lineage of history. So yes, it's hard. Yes, it's difficult, but we have to know from history that we will survive this. We will come through this, and that we should take strength from that dynamic. So say, history has taught us this happens to us. History has taught us that we will survive this. History has taught us that being true to ourselves and our values and ideals, that's what's really going to hold us through. So I think first and foremost, we should look at ourselves. It's our community. It's our faith. We don't need others to tell us that we're good people. Javi, you're a good person. You know that. You don't need me to tell you that. And I think we need to say we can love ourselves. We don't need the love of others to exist. So yes, it is exhausting, but I think, our history teaches us that we have ourselves, and it's us as a people that makes us live. Am Yisrael Chai, makes us strong. So I think that's the first thing that I would say is that, we've gone through this before, we'll get through it again, and that we should take strength from each other. We don't need the validation of the local government. Yes, it would help, but that's not going to be defining our future.
And I love that, that agency, and that other people can think whatever they want, but I know what I need to do. And firstly, I think it does make a difference within the law, or even within the Victorian police force now, where they do that extra training. It's important, and it's totally making a difference, even if we don't always feel it and see it. But we know at least that we're doing everything that we can in our power to do the right thing and to be empowered Jews. And I feel like for you, taking this legal action and doing things in terms of the law is crucial. And for another Jew, it could be walking in their CBD, wearing their kippah. That is their action, where they know that that's what they need to do. We all are doing whatever we need to do in our own way. And it's exhausting. I know it's exhausting. And I assume that you've also received backlash potentially. I'm just guessing, maybe from within the Jewish community, but also I'm sure without, as in you're out there, you're open, you state your beliefs. And in this tolerant society, especially on social media, have you received death threats before and things like that? I'm sure it's taken a toll in that regard.
Yeah, so I think, and it comes back to it. So I don't have to own somebody else's comments. If somebody says something horrible to me or threatens my family, I can make a conscious choice as which what I decide to do is not to I'm not going to own it. That's their view. I don't engage with it. And I know that's unfortunately the domain. It just means that I'm mindful when I'm out in public spaces, that, just to be cautious. What's to say, alert but not alarmed. I think that's the saying. I think at the end of the day, if someone wants to call me a horrible thing, for example, you're a genocidal maniac or baby killer, that's their words. They're not my words. That's not who I am. I know who I am. I don't allow it to get through my skin. And I think what you said was something very, very beautiful. I think, one of the most powerful things we can do is live as Jews. The guy walking in the city, as you said, with his yarmulke on and conduct himself as a mensch and saying hello to strangers and having a smile. That is one of the most powerful things we can do as a people to show that we're actually human. There's that old saying by, Merchant of Venice, Shylock, if you prick us, do we not bleed? And that touches on what we spoke about a moment ago, about anti-Semitism deepness throughout society in the ages. And unfortunately, some people don't see us as the same as humans. But if we can show that we're nice and we're engaging, we don't have to do anything crazy, just with a smile and walking properly and behaving properly. That's the greatest way, not only just as a Kiddush Hashem, but I think also a great response to the anti-Semitism. And to that note, I've got to say there are a lot of non-Jewish people who reach out to me and send me very positive messages all the time. And I get, on a face-to-face level, I get mainly almost entirely positive feedback. I very seldom, if ever, get something negative. So, trolls online, that's easy. But, saying something to somebody's face, I don't get it too often.
That's really nice to hear. And I know that we have so many ordinary Aussies who are upstanders for the Jewish community in Israel. I ran a few events here in Sydney showcasing extraordinary Aussies. And I felt like it was important for us, the Jewish community, to know that Australians do stand with us, and they are with the Jewish people. They do stand with Israel. And things like the protest on the Harbour Bridge, they completely were appalled by that, and they felt that it was completely un-Australian, even though we know that there were over 100,000 people marching, but that is not the majority. Although sometimes I do sometimes think, because we always talk about this silent majority, do you feel, based on your experiences, do they stand with the Jewish people? I do understand that argument when people say what's going on in the Middle East should not be impacting here in Australia. But do you feel the non-Jewish people that you've encountered, do they stand with the Jewish people? Does that exist?
100%. I mean, all the time, just random people out in places such as Rosebud, which is
Yeah.
not part of the Jewish Bagel Belt. People come over to me and make a point of saying something positive. But I think what's also very interesting, Javi, sometimes we get lost in the noise. Resolve Resolve is a political monitoring agency, and they published a survey in The Age, which is a left-leaning newspaper. And it said in that survey that 74% of people, Australians, oppose the recognition of a Palestinian state in September. And what's really interesting, if you break it down, that means only 26% currently support it, which means the vast majority say now's not the time. Now, if you break it down further, some are saying, you've got to wait until Hamas is gone, and some are saying not at all. But what it means is what Albanese is doing now is not necessarily held by all Australians. And I think also in a polite way, one other thing I would say is that, Javi, you and I, Israel's on our mind. It's part of our DNA. But to the average Australian, it's not their primary issue. There are other issues such as, the cost of living and all the rest of it. So they're not thinking about this issue all day, every day. They're not as conscious as I walk past at the Vida Yamko, there's a Jew, Israel, X, Y, Z. It's not their top of mind. And I think for most, average people, they're focused on, what's bothering them most. Can I pay my bills? What's with my kids? And I think that survey, the fact that 74% of Australians oppose the state of Israel, speaks to the fact that it's not a primary thing.
The state of Palestine.
Correct. Sorry, apologies.
No.
But I think also just important to note that one of the aspects that we have to contend with as Jewish Australians, and you see this in New York at the moment with the mayoral race there as well, is that the political party here is left-leaning. And because it's a left-leaning party with strong roots in the anti-Israel or pro-Palestine movement, a lot of what happens on the public discourse is shaped by that. If Anthony Albanese wasn't Prime Minister and it was Peter Dutton, we wouldn't be where we are today. So we have to delineate between what is Australia and what is the political statements of the governing party of the day.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I feel we forget that, and we can get so caught up in that negativity and all those voices, all the hate, all the noise. And we forget, like you said, 74% of Australians oppose a Palestinian state. But also, many Aussies are not even thinking about Israel. I realize a lot of things, it's in my head. Like when I say my name, wear a Magen David, and I wear my Jewish identity on my sleeve. And I'm so proud of that. But a lot of the time I was realizing it was in my head. The regular Aussie, they don't care when they say, oh, Shava, because they can't say Chava. Where does that name come from? And, every time I've said, oh, it's Hebrew and it's from the Bible, Adam and Eve. Eve's name is Chava. They're always like, oh, that's so lovely. I'm realizing more and more that it's those loud negative voices, the social media as well. And I guess mainstream media that also shows those voices a lot, but they're not the majority. And many times it's not that it's in our head, because Jewish trauma is a real thing. But with regards to being in Australia, I think maybe a lot of it is in our head, and maybe the trauma has a lot to do with that. Also important to realize, and with the government, like you said, it's the current government. Had Peter Dutton won, then we would be living in a different Australia in many ways. Which takes me to my next question, because when Jacinta Allen was outside the Adas Shul, I'm pretty sure that you asked her if she had, or if the government lost control over over Australia.
So it was, yeah. So I had asked Jacinta Allen whether she'd lost control. And the reason I'd asked her lost control, because she and I got really upset. I didn't go there with the intention of asking a question or saying anything, but she made, this, which I think was insulting. And if I'd been on the board of Hadassah or Jewish Leader, I would have told her to go shove it, if I can use those words. She
Yeah.
said, I'm going to donate $100,000. I mean, in Victoria, you can't even, pay a stop sign person $100,000. It's going to cost millions of dollars to build this, and she's offering $100,000. I would have told her to go take her money and go pfeifen. But anyway, she then went on to say that she was going to increase visible police controls. And I think to myself, if you're increasing police patrols, you're asserting that you don't have control of the situation, so it's worse. So that's why I said, have you lost control? Yes or no, yes or no. She wouldn't answer. But with the key part to that question, which the media didn't play the entire thing, was, if you recall, and I want to point this out, it's okay for us to be upset, because there have been a number of shuls attacked, both in Sydney and Melbourne, and you can't escape those images, whether it be Hadassah, whether it be Newtown, whether it be
Sydney.
Illawarra, and all of those shuls, East Melbourne. You can't escape those images. But the reality was, in November of 2023, there was the riots here in Caulfield, and Central Shul was closed down on Friday night, and everyone went home. And in criminology, there's what's a theory of broken windows, which was applied by Mayor Rudolph Giuliani in New York when he cleaned New York up. And what the theory of broken windows says is, if you crack down on minor misdemeanor crimes, small things, jumping turnstiles, graffiti, vandalism, the larger crimes don't transpire, because the kids don't go on to do that. And as you know, Melbourne suffers this crime wave at the moment, with kids with machetes, and they're not doing anything about it. So the kids get out on bail, they do it again and again and again. So it's this theory of broken windows they're not applying. So I had said to Jacinta Allen that in November 2023, there'd been a riot at Central Synagogue, and that Section 21 of the Summary Offences Act from 1966, an existing law, gave Victoria Police the right to charge people that disturb religious worship. But Victoria Police did not charge them. And because they did not charge them, they made synagogues a legitimate target. And so therefore, that was the loss of control. The failure to enforce existing laws led to the firing of Hadassah, because had they said, hey, you came to synagogue before, now you're going to jail, which that Summary Offences Act from 1966 had provided, then people go, well, we can do certain protests, but we can't come in near a synagogue or a place of worship, because the Australian law has made clear since 1966, we're talking about a long time ago, that they're off bounds, but the government didn't enforce a law. And that failure to enforce the law was the loss of control that led to the terrorist attack. And I don't step away from that. I fundamentally believe it is a categorical failure of government and police to enforce the law that has us where we are today. It's not an absence of law, it's an absence of law enforcement.
Yeah, and I've always said, when you allow bad behavior to continue, it will just continue and fester and get worse and worse, because people see, hey, I can get away with this, then I can get away with that. And it allows for other people who are not, everyone would say, the cowardly acts of, they're wearing balaclavas, they're covering their faces, but you don't know that the crazy people who are watching these attacks and saying, oh, there wasn't really any consequences. I can get away with something. And with the Victorian police also, they were very good at upholding the law when it came. And I actually think that they weren't upholding the law entirely when it came to COVID. I think they were using their power perhaps too much. I feel like many people in the Jewish community, they're very afraid to start the legal battles. And I've had many people say legal battles, they're not worth it and it's a waste of time. But right now we see that actually the police force are not upholding the law and the government is not upholding the law, which brings me into right now. I think you're fighting a legal battle with regards to the protests and the different chants. Obviously, you think it's worthwhile, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. And you already alluded to why you reckon it's worthwhile. But can you share with us what are you battling with at this current moment?
Javi, if I can I'll come back one step. You're a parent, and you'll set boundaries for your children or your child at this stage, and please God, other children into the future. When you grow up as a child, your parents set boundaries with you. And enforcing those boundaries, make sure that you turn out a particular way, and your children do as well. So at the end of the day, laws are about boundaries of society for acceptable and unacceptable behavior. So police need to enforce those boundaries. In relation to the law, and a lot of people misunderstand that Australia has what's called freedom of speech. We hear about it all the time. Freedom of speech is a process that can say whatever they want. And then there's also in the Victorian Charter of Human Rights, freedom of political communication. So people say, well, if that's freedom of speech in the Constitution, I can do whatever I want. But that's actually not true. There's a number of cases that make clear that the freedom of speech in Australia is not an absolute right. It doesn't mean I can say whatever I want about whomever I want. There are boundaries, and there are reasonable boundaries, and one of those is not to racially or religiously vilify. And there are a couple of key cases, for example, the case of Cottrell versus Ross, and another case of Catch the Fire Ministries versus Islamic Council Victoria. There's also cases at a federal level of Bott versus Eacock, which is in relation to Andrew Bolt and statements made around Aboriginals. And all those cases, whether it be at a state level and a federal level, said that people can make statements in the course of protest. They can make statements in the course of political discourse, but it doesn't give you the right to say whatever you want about somebody. And if I can just explain, and I'll come back to answer how it relates to the case at the moment. In the case of Cottrell versus Ross, it related to a gentleman's probably the wrong word, an individual called Blair Cottrell, a neo-Nazi, who was trying to drum up support to stop a mosque being built in Bendigo. And he did a mock beheading on the video and used a chant of Allah Akbar. And he basically was saying that if this mosque comes to Bendigo, you can expect this violent culture, in his words, not my words, to come to Bendigo. And what the court found is that, so he got convicted, and then he appealed the judgment to say the conviction was unconstitutional because of this implied right of speech. And what the court came down and said in the appeal judgment is that having a political end, so being opposed to the building of a mosque, doesn't give you the right to racial or religiously vilify. So if he wanted to say, I don't want a mosque built, for example, on Labassa Grove because it's a residential street.
Yeah.
There are only houses on the street. There's no parking on the street. It will change the amenity of the street. That's an objective form of an expression. But if he says, I don't want a mosque built on Labassa Grove because I don't want terrorists walking down my street, now that's not objective. That is vilifying, right?
Yeah.
So that's the distinction. And so therefore, my legal actions are saying is, you have the right to protest. You have the right to express a concern about a war in a foreign country. But in expressing a concern about a foreign country or foreign war, you cannot turn around and say all Zionists are terrorists, because that is a very different statement to saying I'm concerned about the war and the way that the Israeli government's prosecuting it. I'm now saying Chavi and Menachem and everyone else are all terrorists. You can't say that. That's no different to the Cottrell versus Ross case. So my cases are primarily focused on the use of particular words at rallies where those words are outside the boundaries of reasonable speech, where they move into racial religious vilification. So in relation to the case where they have against Adam Bant and the Australian Greens or Nasser Mashni and those individuals, it has to do with conduct at rallies of which they endorsed, promoted, or had control over, where various hateful chants were made, and they had prior knowledge that conduct was transpiring. They had prior knowledge of the harm that did to the community, and that they didn't use their authority to stop it. And so therefore, my argument is that they're liable because that conduct was vilifying.
So what were the exact sentences that was said that would be considered no longer freedom of speech, but I guess hate speech?
So there's a couple of cases going on, but one of the key cases revolve around the chant, all Zionists are terrorists. And so, in a very simplistic term, breaking down legally, the operative word, the main word that is problematic from a legal perspective, is the word all. Because all means that all individuals, including my mother who walks with a walking frame and a young baby who, might be crawling, are terrorists. It makes no delineation between a person who might be engaged in conduct unbecoming and just some regular individuals. So it vilifies everybody within that group by virtue of the word all. Now, the other side of that, as you know and I know, the word Zionist is being used as a euphemism for Jew. So, for example, you look at people like David Duke, the head of the Ku Klux Klan, you even go back to books such as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. They use Zionist as a euphemism for Jew. So therefore, by saying all Zionists are terrorists, they're in essence saying all Jews are terrorists. Now, they'll argue that it's a political ideology. And well, that's not actually the question at law. The question at law is, what does the words do to those that hear it? Do they think of it as a Jew? And if they do so, then that is vilifying of that group. I'm not sure if that becomes too technical, but it's...
It doesn't. And I love that you've got to be technical because this is the law. The law doesn't care about people's feelings. They care about the law.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an example in one of the rallies that I'm suing over. I've got footage where an individual takes a microphone, incites a group to chant "All Zionists are terrorists," and then the group go down the street, they find the Jew, and they spray a liquid in his face. So you see the nexus, the connection between the movement of the crowd to that belief, the seeing of a Jew and feeling it's okay to attack him.
Yes.
And I'm saying that is the causation, is that original chant.
And how is it going? I'm talking about non-Jewish people and within the court system. Do you feel like people have been supportive and they're like, yes, these rallies, what they've been chanting is unacceptable and this is really good that you're taking the action, or have they been giving you a hard time?
So I haven't, no one's given me a hard time. The courts, these things can take years, and it might come down to a technical legal question whether the case is decided one way or the other. And I can't guarantee an outcome, that the outcome with the outcome that we want. But what I do know from history is that we've got a justice you shall pursue, is that I have a choice. I can either accept what people are going to say about me, or I can push back against it and give it my best shot to say, this isn't acceptable. The one thing that I will say, which has been disappointing, is that each of the parties that I'm suing, I've reached out to them and said to them and written to them and to their lawyers and offered a deal to settle. And in that, I've made clear to them that I have no objection to their right to protest, and that if they want to protest about Israel, even if I may not agree about everything they say, that they must ensure that the words that they use don't move beyond objective criticism and into vilifying. So if you want to say that I'm concerned about the war, I'm concerned about the human toll that it takes, I'm concerned about the suffering of civilians, that's fine. But you cannot then move on to say that all Zionists are terrorists, or long live the Intifada, or there is only one solution, or, those kind of really horrible things, which I think move too far.
What about when people are waving terrorist flags, whether it be, ISIS or Hezbollah flags, or there's that famous image on the Harbour Bridge and that big image of Nasrallah. Are those considered against the law, like waving a Hezbollah flag, for instance?
So some of them could potentially be breaches of federal criminal law, where, displaying symbols of a prescribed terrorist organization. There are probably lots of different actions that can be taken. I'm not across what my civil rights might be in relation to that. And the truth is, what I'm trying to do is rather than sue every single situation that arises, is take a couple of, we'll call it higher level instructive, kind of legal proceedings to kind of set the benchmark to enforce this principle that freedom of speech in Australia is not absolute, and freedom of speech isn't freedom to racially or religiously vilify. And that is one of the main outcomes that I want the court to enforce. It says, if you want to protest about a foreign conflict, you can, but you can't vilify Jewish Australians as a consequence. And that is consistent with the IHRA definition of antisemitism, which says it's okay to criticize the Israeli government, but it's not okay to hold Jews collectively responsible. And in essence, what I'm trying to do through these civil cases is to enforce the existing position at law that is consistent with the IHRA position on antisemitism.
I know the law works within each state or territory, and then there's federal law. Do you feel like we needed to update our free speech laws? Because right now, I know that specific phrases can be targeted, but when someone says from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free or globalize the intifada, for me, I take that as Jew, like there shouldn't be a Jewish state, or the intifadas were a whole bunch of terrorist attacks. On one hand, people can say, well, I've got the freedom to say whatever I want, but do you feel our laws are a bit lax with regards to freedom of speech?
So coming back to it, I believe I have a view in life in general where there's a will, there's a way. So, I mentioned before about the Summary Offences Act from 1966, and it has a law there about targeting religious places of worship. So they could have used that law, they didn't. In that same act, Section 17 of the act talks about grossly offensive public conduct, about using particular words, offensive language. So there is means around it. But just on that chant of from the river to the sea, people may not be aware, but on the 16th of May 2024, the Australian Senate passed a motion saying that the chant from the river to the sea is a chant used by those that seek to intimidate Jewish Australians via acts of antisemitism. And I point that out because that means that the Parliament, now the only people in Parliament who didn't vote for that motion were the Australian Greens, but both Labor and Liberal senators passed that motion. Now, what that means is that there's an accepted premise within government, in theory, that that chant is problematic. The problem is that it hasn't been enforced or made clear that it's problematic. And I think that's really where the issue falls away. And I think, without getting into too much detail around the legal case, one of the things that I've discovered in relation to my legal proceedings at the moment against the state government and the police is that before each rally, they prepare for the officers what's called a briefing pack that outlines all the different risks that could transpire, and gives them a briefing of the laws that are available to these officers to prosecute or charge individuals. And from the briefing packs that I've seen, nowhere have they stated to the officers about the existence of the Racial and Religious Tolerance Act. Nowhere have they stated to the officers that freedom of speech in Australia is not absolute, that there are limits. Instead, they talk there about crimes such as, blocking traffic or throwing a projectile. And I think really what the key issue is there's a failure of government and the police to enforce what is the existing law, that the right to protest isn't the right to vilify, that we have laws around racial vilification and offensive language. We've already had a motion from the Senate that says certain chants are problematic, but we haven't set up, I was talking before about boundaries as parents.
Yeah.
The government's not setting up those boundaries as parents about the bad children in our community. And I think it's as simple as that.
So then how is it still going on? We live in Australia. This is not a backwards country. So how is it that every single Sunday, these protests where these chants are being said, they're still happening? You're obviously not the Victorian police, so you can't speak on behalf of them, but they're obviously not doing their jobs. How is that possible?
So there was a theory in the beginning, and perhaps others can speak to it, that they thought that the rallies were a way for people to let off steam. So if you recall, I think around, was it 8th or 9th of October 2023, when you had those scenes at the Sydney Opera House, which was supposed to be an occasion to memorialise the 7th of October victims, it was overrun by anti-Israel protesters. And I think there had been an initial view within policing that these rallies would be a way for people to let off steam. It was better to let them let off steam in that environment than to suppress it and see it manifest in a different way. And I think, unfortunately, that was a misguided view. And what's happened is, because they allowed certain behaviours to transpire almost since day one, those conduct has become normalised and they can't put the genie back in the bottle.
But what about right now? So they can't put the genie back in the bottle and therefore there's nothing that can be done.
I think that was a wrong approach. And I think if we come back to the earlier, what we talked about, this theory of broken windows, small misdemeanors end up in larger crimes. And we talk about the notion of parenting, you're setting boundaries early, you stop worse behaviour later. I think what's happened is they didn't enforce the law at the beginning. It's become worse, but they're still not enforcing the law now. It's become even more worse. Like I think you mentioned a moment ago about flags of Hezbollah and ISIS. Those flags didn't appear in the early stages. Those things only progressively became more and more visible as time went on. The pictures of, Nasrallah or other leaders, they only appeared later in the process. They didn't appear day one. And so what's happened is these people are continually pushing the boundaries. We didn't see Adass Yisrael Synagogue burn day one. We saw it burn a year and a bit later. And so therefore, it's only a matter of time. And I hate to say this, before we probably see something even more tragic potentially. And I think that's just a natural consequence of letting this thing run, which is what the government's done. And I think what they really should do is they should be doing what I'm doing. They should be focusing on the couple of key leaders and key individuals within the movement and prosecuting them for hate speech or enabling hate speech or inciting hate speech. And if they crack down on them, then Menachem Vorchheimer wouldn't have to do it. And then everyone else, the genie would be putting back in the bottle. Because at the end of the day, the reality is the police do have the laws, the government do have the laws, and it shouldn't be up to private citizens to enforce them. And recently, there was a case of Wertheimer versus Haddad, which in relation was run by the Executive Council of Australian Jury in New South Wales in relation to hate speech. And as Peter Wertheimer and Robert Gut said at the end of that case, that they should never have had to run that case. That case should have been run by the government of the day, but they were left with no alternative but to run it because the government hadn't done so. And so to that end, it's never too late for the government to do it. But I'm not going to sit here wondering and waiting for them to do it. If they're not going to do it, I'm going to step up and do it. And if others want to do that, by all means, go for your life.
Yeah. Tzedek, Teardorf, and you're doing what you believe is right. And I feel the fact that private citizens need to be taking these actions already show that the government has 100% lost control of the situation, unfortunately. And this is why these anti-Semitic attacks and graffitis and car bombings, etc., are happening, unfortunately, way too often in this country, which is why people like me, I'm a young mom, young family, and I think, is there a future for me here in Australia? I mean, obviously, this is where I am. I have a mission here, and I try and increase in my acts of goodness and kindness wherever I am. So I know that it's not pointless at all, and God put me here for a reason. But I do feel, I don't know if there's a future for my son in 20 years' time, if Australia is going to be continuing in this trajectory. I don't want him to feel scared. And I know that right now in Australia, the chances of someone getting physically assaulted, although it's happened to you, and are not, I think, very high. It's more feeling uncomfortable, but I don't know what will be. I think it's really unfortunate that we're even in this situation. I wonder, because your anti-Semitic attack was a couple years back, did you ever feel that the situation would get worse? Were you like, this is the start? If what happened to me wasn't taken seriously at all and it was an off-duty police officer, did you kind of have an inclination that maybe that Australia was kind of going down, or you thought it was your unlucky day, unlucky moment, unlucky situation?
Yeah, so I at that point in time, I never saw this coming, and I didn't think it was a part of a larger problem. What was really interesting back then was because, this goes back a long time. 2006, the landscape was quite different. In football, you had people like Nicky Winmar and people of that nature, an Aboriginal player who were vilified in the field. So racism was a bit more widespread more broadly. And that was one of the reasons why the outcome I looked at was about protecting all people for securing their identity. And the number of times a non-Jewish person who might be of a coloured background would approach me and say, I've seen you on TV and you're doing a great job. I remember getting to the airport in customs, and the customer goes, it's you. Great, just come this way. I'll put you through security. Because the issue spoke to a racist problem, not an anti-Jewish problem. It talked about where society was 20 years ago was much, much different. And just building on that, it's quite interesting. I'm not sure if you follow the football, the AFL, but there's a bit of a issue at the moment because a star player from Adelaide is caught up in an alleged homophobic slur that he made, and he could be banned and miss out on playing in the grand final. And what's interesting about that is he said a homophobic slur, the AFL could penalise him for 5 weeks. But yet, when we have those type of words said about Jew, there isn't that level of enforcement. And that's where I feel there's this disconnect. We've tolerated one form of hate and showed intolerance to another form of hate, whereas all forms of hate should be treated equally. And it comes back to that general premise of every person has the right to feel safe and secure in their identity, whether it be racial, religious, sexual, physical, mental, or otherwise.
Yeah, I feel anti-Semitism is a different sort of bigotry where it doesn't operate the way that other bigotries operate. And I know when we say we want to create a tolerant, inclusive society, we speak about racism and prejudices and homophobes and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. We put it all in the same box. And I've come to realize that anti-Semitism, and it's not that we're trying to make different boxes over here. We're not special or anything, but it just has always been something separate. And I don't think it's treated like other bigotries because it doesn't matter whether the Jew's a communist or a capitalist. If a Jew is on the top or if we're going through the Holocaust and we're being gassed and we're at literally the bottom, we are helpless. It doesn't matter what the Jew does. The Jew will just be treated differently and hated differently. And now we see that with Zionism and Israel, just another disguise, which is why I also feel, I mean, yes, education is crucial and teaching people to be tolerant. But I feel us Jews during this specific time period, as best as we can, try and be unapologetic for who we are and be empowered Jews. That's something that we can all do. For me, is one of the biggest answers to this current reality, because unfortunately you can educate from today to tomorrow, but we know that the haters are going to hate. But at the same time, I do feel like there are also many very like-minded or neutral Aussies who, I mean, they might not care, but they'll be open to a discussion. What do you feel about engaging in dialogue with others? Because you're also an advocate as well as a lawyer. Do you feel like there's purpose in having conversations with people? What's your take on all of that?
Um, so first and foremost is, I think we said earlier, we don't have to own other people's views of us. So if someone says something horrible about us, we don't have to own it. In relation to engaging with people, I think each has to be to their own. I mean, you have to feel, Javi, if you're engaging with somebody, comfortable and safe in that dialogue. So if the person is screaming out various crazy epithets and it's apparent that the person's not quite right,
Mm.
there's probably no benefit in engaging with them because you're not going to move them. They're going to become quite visceral or angry and you're going to feel unsafe. So if it was me, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't empower myself. If somebody comes to you and politely asks you a question and engages with you in a reasonable way and they're listening, so it's not just like, oh, you're an idiot. So you can engage them, but I think you need to assess what's right for you and how you or the individual feels. If they feel safe and secure in doing so, they should do so. If they don't feel safe and secure in doing so, they don't have to do so. But I think still one of the smallest things we can do is walk down the street as proud Jews, be smiley, say hello to people. That's a really powerful way. And I think, as we said before, 74% of Australians currently oppose the recognition of a Palestinian state at the UN in September. And I think it's important not to allow us to get caught up by all the negative noise and remember that the vast majority of Australians don't accept what Hamas did and those views. And I think, if you want to engage with people, only engage in healthy conversations, not in unhealthy conversations. You're not going to move the village idiot to accept your view. So don't engage with the village idiot. That's my view.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also with regards to social media, I think it's kind of pointless. I mean, I always get very tempted to comment and all these people saying all these bad things about Israel that are completely false. And I'm just wanting to comment back. It's actually a waste of your time and energy because it's not going anywhere. And these are the types of people that you don't want to be engaging with. It's the people that you have a relationship with, whether it be a work colleague, a neighbor, your physio, whatever, those people that you have those relationships and they know you and they know that you're a Jew and that you're actually a mensch and a really nice person, they're worthwhile to engage with. But everyone else, they're just the noise. And that's when we got to let them. Is the Mel Robbins theory, let them? I don't know if you've heard of that theory before.
No, I haven't.
That's literally what it is. It's let them. So they want to do whatever they want to do and protest and say things. Obviously, you can't let them if they're breaking the law and if they're causing danger to you and your family, then you've got to act, which is where it comes to the let me. So it's let them, but then it's let me decide what am I going to do about it? Sometimes it's not worth doing anything. Sometimes the best thing is to just be a proud Jew or whatever it might be. But it's up to you. You give the power to yourself. You don't give power to them. That's basically the theory in a nutshell, but you can Google it, but you already know it innately, so you don't even need to.
Just to build on, Javi, what you were saying, the way the response, so for example, when we had the Sydney Harbour Bridge protests, you're not going to go there and argue with those 100,000 people. So, but there are other ways to put forward our viewpoint. We can have our own rally. We can develop our own narrative. We can put up our own social media feeds. We can do that. You don't have to engage with the troll. You can find other means to put out the alternative narrative to people to know that. So engaging with the village idiot, you're not going to shape the village idiot, but you can utilize social media to create your own social media posts, to create information for the uneducated. That's another alternative.
We have never, as a community, really protested much, as in there are Jews who go to the protests and hold Israeli flags, but we're very into holding vigils and not upsetting the community or the government, and let's just be quiet and peaceful. Do you ever feel like, hold on, they're having protests every Sunday. We should be protesting anti-Semitism is un-Australian, and there's a difference between freedom of speech and hate speech. Like, we have a lot that we could be protesting for. Every person deserves to feel safe in Australia. Do you feel like we should also be protesting?
I mean, it's probably a larger conversation, one you could probably have with the psychologist, as to whether Jewish trauma means that, for generations has meant that we've traditionally tried to be quiet, that we try not to draw too much attention to ourselves. And maybe it might be part of our DNA that we're not protesters by nature and we're intellectuals by nature. But, that's probably a discussion for as psychologists to break that down as to why we respond the way we do.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And my last question to you is, what do you feel the future of Australia will be? Or what would you like the future of Australia to be? What's your vision?
What I'd like to be, or what do I think it's going to be?
Let's do what you think it would be, and then let's end on a hopeful note, what you would like things to be.
So if you said to me 2 years ago we would be where we are today, I would have thought you were nuts. And I say that politely, Javi.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was going to get as bad as it did. I didn't think there would have been an attack at us or at Newtown or Illawarra or East Melbourne or on
Anyway,
Alex Rifchin's former home, all of those things. I didn't see that. And I don't think most of us saw that. And in saying that, if I then look at what's happened over the last 2 and a bit years, or 2 years rather, and then look at, for example, what's happened in the last 24 hours with some of the comments backwards and forwards between Bibi Netanyahu and Anthony Albanese, and then the horrible comments by Tony Burke yesterday, where he talked about strength isn't blowing up people or starving people. And I think to myself, those type of words from a political leader actually only feed into the anti-Semitic perceptions of Jews as these horrid individuals. So I think on that trajectory, unless we have a circuit breaker, things are going to get worse before they're going to get better. And I think that's made worse by the fact that we've got a left-leaning government who've got a strong majority, and they might be in power for 2 terms of government. So unless there's a circuit breaker, I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon. That being said, I'm hopeful on a geopolitical level that the issues in the Middle East come to a head sooner rather than later, that some kind of ceasefire or deal is done with under President Trump, and that changes the dynamics. And then if the situation in the Middle East dies down, then hopefully issues in the Australian arena die down, and then people, the protests slowly dissipate. The people that hate us, and everyone goes back, shalom of shalva, all back into their corners. I don't know, but all I do know is that we don't have to own other people's words about us, and we just have to continue living the best life we can and being, as you say, good individuals walking in the city with our yarmulkes and Magen Davids and living our best life and choosing who we engage with, choosing what we accept and what we don't accept, and being positive about it. You be you, I'll be me. And just because someone says something negative about you doesn't mean you have to own it. That's their problem, not yours. And I think that's the way I try to live. If I was to go and read every single horrible thing somebody said about me, then I wouldn't be in the public domain. So I don't engage with it. I don't allow it to become part of me. And if someone says something stupid about me, sometimes I just will say to the person, go take your medication. You've got a problem. It's not me.
I love that. I love that. Menachem, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for what you're doing for not only the Jewish community, but the Australian community as a whole. Your work is really making an impact. And we're very lucky to have people like you in our community doing what you do. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Charlene. It's very kind of you, but we're all in this together. It's all our fight. So each of us does what we can.